They never told you that executions were not just about death, they were about theater. A theater of control, where blood was ink, and the blade was the pen that rewrote history in real time. Imagine the cobblestones of the Tower of London, slick not only with rain but with centuries of human terror. Men, women, nobles, traitors, all dragged into that fortress not for swift justice, but for spectacle. The Tower was never just a prison. It was a machine of fear. A laboratory of control. A cathedral where the state worshipped its only true god, power. Take the story of Margaret Pole, the 67-year-old countess who refused to kneel. She ran. Yes, ran, while the executioner, sweating, clumsy, incompetent, chased her with his axe like some grotesque parody of justice. 11 strikes. Not one clean cut. 11 butcher's blows to silence a woman whose bloodline threatened the throne. The crowd gasped, horrified. But horror was the point. They weren't meant to see a dignified death. They were meant to see what happens when you resist. And here is the truth no historian will tell you: executions at the Tower weren't punishments. They were demonstrations. Lessons carved into flesh. A warning whispered into the marrow of every man watching: this is what happens when you forget who rules you. Every scream, every failed stroke of the blade was part of a choreography, a ritual to remind Londoners that rebellion wasn't just dangerous, it was suicide in the most public, humiliating way possible. But look closer. Beyond the blood, beyond the clumsy executioners and the jeering crowds, you'll find something darker. Because executions at the Tower weren't only for the condemned, they were for you. They were psychological conditioning centuries before the term existed. The Tower was a primitive but highly effective control system. Every blade that fell, every drop of blood that splashed onto the scaffold, carried the same hidden message: you are small, the crown is infinite. And here's the sinister genius: they made you pay for it. Prisoners often funded their own executions. Families bribed the executioner to strike quickly, as if mercy could be purchased. Even death became a transaction. And in that exchange, the monarchy proved its true mastery. They didn't just own your body. They owned your dignity, your fear, your memory. This wasn't justice. This was programming. And once you see that, you can never unsee it. The Tower of London was not built as a fortress against enemies. It was built as a fortress against you. From the moment William the Conqueror ordered its construction in 1078, its purpose was clear: control, not defense. A castle turned inward, staring down its own people. Its arrow slits weren't angled to face armies. They were angled to watch Londoners. Every stone was a surveillance device, every wall a warning. The Saxon workers who built it understood this truth in their bones. They bled into the mortar. They mixed their own blood with the stone when cattle ran short for binding. Their lives, their lineage, their sweat and agony became part of the walls. And what was their payment? Not coin. Not freedom. Bread. Ale. Survival. They built the very structure that enslaved them, and they knew it. That's the hidden curse of the Tower: its foundation is soaked in unwilling obedience. Think about the design. 15 feet of solid stone at the base, tapering as it climbed skyward, turning into a stone fist that loomed over the city like God himself. Spiral staircases twisted clockwise, giving advantage to Norman swordsmen defending from above. The chapel gleamed on the upper floors, reserved only for nobles to face death near God. And beneath, deep in the damp underground, the truth of the Tower whispered through its walls: torture chambers with drainage channels carved for blood long before the first rack ever arrived. This is architecture as domination. It wasn't just about confining bodies, it was about rewriting the mind. Every time a prisoner was dragged through the gates, the building itself spoke: you are nothing. You are prey. You are already forgotten. The White Tower's shadow wasn't just a mark on the city, it was a permanent scar on the psyche of an entire people. And here's what you weren't supposed to notice: the tower didn't need executions to function. Its very presence executed hope. Just standing before its walls, you knew the cost of disobedience. The building itself was a silent executioner. This is where the Crown was clever beyond comprehension. They didn't just build a fortress. They built a theater of fear. They built a machine of submission. They built a place where death was certain but dignity was optional, where men could be erased not just from life but from history. The tower wasn't stone. It was psychological warfare, frozen in limestone. Picture the scaffold on Tower Hill. The crowd gathers shoulder to shoulder, their breath fogging the cold air, waiting not for justice but for entertainment. Children lifted onto shoulders. Merchants pushing forward to see better. Nobles with their fine cloaks drawn tight, smirking with the security of loyalty, or at least the appearance of it. But above all of them, one figure mattered most: the condemned. When a man stepped onto the platform, he ceased to be a man. He became a symbol. Every eye was on him, and every movement was recorded in the minds of the people. Was he defiant? Was he broken? Would he pray? Would he curse? The monarchy understood this well. The execution wasn't about removing a traitor, it was about scripting a message. And so the ritual unfolded. The prisoner was expected to confess, to admit guilt, even if that guilt was manufactured. The crowd wanted it. The crown demanded it. Words mattered more than blood. Because if the condemned spoke submission, even with his final breath, then rebellion itself was silenced. But if he resisted, if he declared his innocence, then came the axe. Steel was the final editor of truth. History would remember only what the monarchy allowed. The executioner wasn't just a butcher. He was an actor in a state play. He might be bribed to make it swift, or careless enough to drag it out. A botched strike wasn't an accident, it was part of the lesson. Margaret Pole's 11 blows weren't incompetence. They were deliberate humiliation, ensuring her memory would be soaked not in dignity but in horror. The crown didn't just kill her. They erased her nobility and turned her into a grotesque warning. And here is the secret almost no one speaks: executions at the tower were not only about the victim, they were about you. Every slash of the blade, every drop of blood in the straw was meant to carve a message into the minds of the crowd: do not resist. Do not rise. This is what awaits you. The screams were not for the dying. They were for the living. This was psychological programming disguised as punishment. And the more you watched, the deeper it sank into your bones. You learned fear. You learned obedience. You learned silence. The tower killed bodies. The scaffold killed hope. The tower did not simply kill you, it made you pay for the privilege. This is the part they don't tell you in history books: death at the scaffold was never free. It was bought, sold, and negotiated like grain at the market. Even at the threshold of eternity, the state reminded you that you were not sovereign over your own body. Your executioner was. Before the blade ever rose, prisoners were expected to bribe their killers. A purse of coins might earn you a clean, swift stroke. Fail to pay, and your death became a public spectacle of agony. The axe might fall dull. The sword might hesitate. The executioner's hand might slip, requiring 2, 3, or even 10 strikes to finish the job. Your last moments became a gamble, and your family's last act of love was to pay blood money so you would not suffer longer than necessary. Do you see the genius here? Even death itself was monetized. The monarchy didn't just own your land, your labor, or your loyalty. They owned your very exit from this world. You didn't die free. You died indebted. And it didn't stop there. Crowds often tossed coins to executioners for especially brutal performances. The more blood, the more screams, the more silver clinked into the purse. Death became entertainment. Suffering became currency. The condemned weren't just punished, they were used as raw material for the spectacle economy of fear. Now imagine the psychological weight of this system. Every man in London knew, if you crossed the Crown, not only would you lose your head, you'd lose your dignity. You'd die knowing that your children, your wife, your lineage would pay the price to soften the swing of the axe. And even then, mercy was never guaranteed. Here lies the deeper corruption. Executions weren't simply punishment. They were business. They were propaganda. They were a tool of control so complete that even in death, you remained a customer of the state. And as you hear this, let me ask you something dangerous. Would you have paid? Would you have begged your family to spend their last coins on your dignity? Or would you have faced the blade knowing the man who killed you might deliberately draw out your agony to remind the crowd that power was never yours to begin with? The Tower didn't just kill traitors. It sold their suffering. Listen carefully now, because this is where history stops looking like history and begins to look like mind control. Every execution at the Tower was not just the killing of a traitor. It was a ritual. A carefully staged performance designed to burn images into the minds of everyone watching. Imagine being in the crowd. The smell of iron in the air. The condemned kneeling before the block. The hush before the blade falls. You are not just witnessing death, you are being written upon, one scream at a time. The Crown knew the secret of power: fear is more effective when it is shared. When thousands of people watch one man die, they are all executed in part. They die a little inside. Their will to resist is shattered. They carry that trauma home, back into their houses, into their children's ears as bedtime warnings. Do not cross the king. In this way, executions multiplied their victims. One man's death became the silent death of 1,000 men's courage. This is identity erasure. The condemned was stripped not only of life, but of meaning. Their name, their honor, their lineage, all dissolved under the shadow of the axe. The Crown didn't want martyrs. Martyrs inspire rebellion. The Crown wanted ghosts, men so broken, so mutilated in memory, that even to whisper their names felt like treason. And the crowd, unknowingly, became accomplices. They gasped. They cheered. They jeered. They repeated the ritual by carrying its horror in their minds. That is how psychological control works. Not with chains. Not with walls. But with symbols of terror that live inside you long after the blood has dried. Now I ask you, the one listening to this, do you see why this matters? Because you are not just hearing history, you are hearing the blueprint of control. This is the same script institutions use today. Spectacle. Humiliation. Fear as theater. Different tools, same purpose. To keep you small. To keep you obedient. To keep you silent. If you are ready to break free of that silence, type this phrase into the comments right now, and type it twice so it etches itself into you. I do not kneel. Write it, declare it, own it. Twice. This is how you reclaim the identity they tried to steal from men centuries ago. Because once you refuse to kneel, no tower, no king, no institution can own you again. Now listen as I pull back the last curtain. The Tower's brutality was not a series of isolated horrors, it was a node in a network. The scaffold sat at the center of a system that stitched law, church, commerce, and rumor into a single, seamless instrument of domination. The Crown didn't merely wield the sword. It legalized terror, sanctified it, monetized it, and then made the city compulsory witness. Law gave the ritual teeth. Statutes and proclamations turned arbitrary violence into rightful punishment. Judges wrote the script, clerics blessed it. The church supplied the language of sin, confession, and salvation, tools that made public humiliation look like divine order. When a condemned man muttered a repentant prayer before the block, it read back to the crowd as proof that the Crown's version of truth was also God's. The ritual wrapped itself in sanctity so that dissent could be dismissed as heresy, rebellion as moral corruption. Commerce completed the circuit. Merchants who profited off crown contracts had a vested interest in visible stability. Markets depend on predictability, predictability on fear. Execution days were market days, crowds swelled, coins changed hands, vendors sold tokens and sausages beside the scaffold. The economy demanded order, and order demanded spectacle. Merchants sponsored public displays, their wealth reinforced the narrative that obedience equals prosperity. The Tower taught the populace that submission was the only currency that bought daily bread. Informants and spies supplied the raw material. Neighbors betrayed neighbors for favors, and the crown paid information with positions, pardons, relief from taxes. A simple rumor could become a formal charge. The wheels of power ground on gossip turned into indictments. And when the accused were paraded to the Tower, the entire machinery, legal, clerical, commercial, aligned to ensure the lesson reached every household. And then there were the historians, the chroniclers commissioned to write the right story. They decided which names were honored, which were erased. The Tower didn't only kill bodies, it curated memory. It made sure certain narratives survived and others dissolved into myth. Names became cautionary tales, lives were refashioned to validate the system that murdered them. What I want you to understand is simple and dangerous. This was not chaotic cruelty. It was architecture, as deliberate as law, as methodical as worship, as transactional as trade. The Tower was the prototype of institutional manipulation, a blueprint copied in parliaments, pulpits, markets, and bureaucracies across centuries. And if you're paying attention, you'll see the echo of that blueprint today, in televised trials, in public shaming, in institutions that stage humiliation as correction. The tools change. The ritual persists. The lesson remains the same: make the spectacle, own the mind. Now we arrive at the deepest chamber, the place where history and the present collapse into one another. You've walked with me through blood-soaked scaffolds, through walls bound with human suffering, through rituals designed to rewrite memory itself. And here is the revelation you were never meant to hear: the Tower of London never fell. The building still stands, yes, but what matters is that its system survived. Because the Tower was never just a fortress, it was a template. A design for domination. And every age since has borrowed from it. Today, the blade no longer swings above straw-strewn blocks. Today, the rack is hidden. The screams are quieter. But the mechanisms remain. Public humiliation, media trials, reputational beheadings, these are the modern executions. And just like in the Tower, you are still invited to watch. To gasp. To obey. The Tower's lesson was always the same: break the man, not just his body. Make him kneel before death. Strip his name of honor. Sell his suffering as entertainment. And then turn the crowd into accomplices by making them spectators. Does that sound unfamiliar to you? Look closer. Every viral scandal, every orchestrated downfall, every ritual of public shame follows the same blueprint. The Tower never closed. It just moved into the bloodstream of culture. And here is the final truth, the one you may already feel burning inside you: this knowledge is dangerous because it demands something of you. Once you see the architecture of control, you can no longer play along blindly. You can no longer be just another face in the crowd, cheering or cowering as another man's life is shredded before you. You must decide. Do you kneel? Or do you rise? Understand, rising is not rebellion of the sword. It is rebellion of the mind. It is refusing to let institutions rent space inside your skull. It is reclaiming your name, your honor, your memory. It is refusing to be rewritten by their narrative. The Tower of London stood as a monument to fear. But you are no longer in its shadow. You carry a different fire now, one they cannot extinguish. Because once a man sees the chains for what they are, they can never hold him again. The Tower killed bodies. The system killed souls. But you have seen through it. And that means you are no longer prey. You are awake. And awakening is the only execution they cannot stage.